Hey there, my name is Mariah Medina. I am an investigative reporter for News for San Antonio. My story regarding sex offenders having the ability to deregister, have their information removed from the sex offender registry, airs tonight at 10, and it's probably aired right now. I don't know how you receive your news, but I figured I would answer questions about what I've learned through this process, as well as just the questions that I had first entering this process. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments and I will answer them to the best of my abilities. I had the privilege of talking to an individual who is one of a handful of licensed deregistration experts. So those individuals essentially talk to sex offenders that are seeking to be removed from the sex offender registry here in Texas. So the way that it works is basically you have to have one offense that falls under this particular list, and that list has to have federally, a shorter registration requirement than that of the state. And I found that that list included a number of crimes, just insane, honestly. The way that I came onto this story initially was I subscribed to a variety of different newsletters, particularly from the state, from the federal government. And one day I got an email last month, actually, and it said, the State Council on Health and Human Services has updated their sex offender deregistration step-by-step guide. And I was like, I might be hallucinating, but like I haven't really worked that hard of a week. So I clicked the link, and turns out, sure enough, it was a step-by-step guide as to how to deregister. And so that became my fun fact that I shared with people. Did you know that sex offenders can get their information taken off of the sex offender registry? And just a very, very eye-opening moment for me. And I wanted to speak to experts, individuals that had, experience working with sex offenders, individuals that had experience working with people in the criminal justice system. And obviously, I found an individual who started the first sex offender treatment program for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, who is one of a handful, of course, of licensed deregistration experts. What prompted the email? Hey, Eric. So, what prompted the email was the fact that Health and Human Services had updated their step-by-step guide as to how to get off of the sex offender registry. So not only does Texas have a law on the books that allows sex offenders to get off of the sex offender registry early, they also publish a step-by-step guide, which I found fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of self-help from Texas Law Guide, and all sorts of publicly available self-help things, but not necessarily published by the state. So I found that very, very interesting, that Health and Human Services the Council on Sex Offender Treatment, which is under Health and Human Services, they published that step-by-step guide. And it literally is step 1. Do you have a charge that falls under this list? Step 2, do you have, does that charge carry a requirement under the state of Texas to register for a period greater than that of the federal government? And then step 3, obviously, submitting your forms and things like this. I spoke with a deregistration expert that said that it's, usually under, $4,000, which to me, having had experience in the criminal defense world, I know how expensive it is to even get the services of a criminal defense lawyer. So $4,000 is actually kind of cheap when it comes to this particular service. And this is, again, all out of the offender's pocket, but at the same time, it was just absolutely shocking to me. So, uh, yeah, that's what prompted the email, the fact that they updated their step-by-step guide as to how to get off. Let's see. I'm looking at the did you talk to anyone actually on the list during your investigation? Oh my goodness, I tried. I tried so hard. I tried so hard, but let me tell you, why it was very difficult to find somebody that had been removed from the list. So, the sex offender registry is comprised of about 101,000 individuals. And so the number of people that requested or applied to be removed from the registry was about 101, I believe. And the number of individuals that were approved to ask a court to be removed from the list was 20 people. So in this list, this expansive list of 101,000 individuals, only 20 people were approved to ask the court to get off of the list. And so that's a very, very small fraction. And, obviously these individuals are seeking to have a lower profile. I don't think anybody's going to come out there and be like, "Hey, I'm one of the handful of individuals that sought to be removed from the sex offender registry, and I'd like to talk to you on camera." And I'd even offered, I will blur your name, or I'm sorry, I will blur your face, conceal your name, change your voice. I'll do everything. I will protect your anonymity because I understand that that is the end goal, correct? And so, nope, had nobody reach out to me um, that wanted to talk or advocate for that process. Um, and so, Eric, is there a requirement to notify victims? As far as I understand, no, there actually isn't a requirement to notify victims. So victims can go in and like type in a particular offender and create notifications, and it literally says you will be notified if this person changes address, if this person XYZ, including if this person is removed from the registry. And so it's not unless you are proactive about seeking that type of notification. Lawrence, thank you so much for tuning in. Um, this is about I don't know if you knew this. I didn't know this, but sex offenders can have their information removed from the state registry. And so I just saw on Reddit a couple weeks ago an individual posting a screenshot of, I guess, their neighborhood, and there were a lot of dots everywhere. And there was a very considerable dialogue about the sex offender registry and things like this. And so somebody had mentioned that, well, some of these people were convicted, of a silly crime. They had maybe exposed themselves while intoxicated on the premises of a school ground or whatever. And so the charges that qualify for removal, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. I do, I do understand the whole fact that perhaps sex offender registries are counterproductive to rehabilitating offenders, but at the same time, the public relies on these tools to yes, okay, Mitzi. So yes, the public relies on these tools to keep them informed. And yes, Mitzi is absolutely right. It will still always be on their record. The deregistration specialist that I talked to said this isn't us trying to relitigate the facts. We're not trying to talk about guilt or innocence. This person is guilty. This person is guilty. But this hearing is solely intended to to get them off the registry. And so I talked to Sheriff Salazar briefly, and he was like, if there was ever a need, if at any point in your life there was ever a need to get you on this sex offender registry for a lifetime, mind you, lifetime registrations qualify for removal from the sex offender registry. He said, if there's any reason why at any point in your life that somebody found it necessary to put you on this list, you should stay there for life. So, so to answer your question, Mitzi, yeah, it doesn't change the fact that they're guilty, but it does change the fact that the public no longer is aware of the fact that they might be your neighbor. Michelle, what does this mean for families trying to stay safe? You know, Michelle, I unfortunately have no advice for this particular issue, because if an individual is removed from the registry, that is most Texans' first line of defense. I mean, you look at Halloween, for example, it's a very common thing to research who is on the sex offender registry. I don't want my kids knocking at this individual's door. I don't want them to be interacting with this individual. And so, you know, this is a very, very small fraction of individuals, but I did feel that it was a story that was absolutely necessary to shed light on this very, I guess, little known law that some people do seek to exercise. Let me see. Have you talked with? Why would they even consider doing that? I know they said to reallocate funds. Rachel, great question. So the legislative, I guess, summaries of these particular laws and amendments and things of this nature basically said that we have so many people on the sex offender registry, and if I'm not mistaken, we definitely lead the country in the number of registered sex offenders, but California is second to us. So we have nearly 101,000 sex offenders on our sex offender registry. California is second to us with 61,764. Sorry, I had to go and look that up. But the rationale here is that our sex offender registry statutes are so broad that so many people get caught in this net, and it doesn't leave any resources for law enforcement to focus on the individuals that actually need to be monitored. Something that this deregistration expert talked to me about was the fact that some of these individuals, some of these sex offenders have great attorneys, and they're able to plead the case down to something that doesn't require a lifetime registry or even registration at all. It's not even on a sex offender docket, if you will. Would I like to play the story? Yeah, no, of course. Cindy, I'm going to get to your question here, but I want to play the story for some of these people that are tuning in a little bit later, so that they know what we're talking about. So, Bob,
guys that have told me, hey, doing prison was easy. Being on the registry, that's a life sentence.
Bruce Cameron is one of a handful of specialists licensed to evaluate sex offenders who want to be removed from the sex offender registry.
It's all spelled out online.
Just last month, the state's Council on Sex Offender Treatment updated its step-by-step guide on how to deregister. Sex offenders can apply if they have a single reportable conviction or adjudication, which is the legal resolution to a criminal charge, so long as the state's requirements for registration exceed those of the federal government's. DPS even publishes a list of those charges online. Charges like trafficking of children and continuous sexual abuse of a young child qualify so long as it's only one conviction or adjudication.
We've had people in Austin look at this. 25% of the people on that registry are actually theoretically eligible for deregistration.
After the Council on Sex Offender Treatment reviews the application and verifies whether the sex offender qualifies,
they receive a letter from Austin saying, hey, you qualify for a deregistration evaluation. Here's a list of the 22 deregistration evaluators in the state of Texas.
That's where Cameron comes in.
My position is to deliver the test, write up the report, and send it for somebody else to make a decision. I'm not a decision maker.
If the evaluator feels that the candidate poses a low risk of reoffending, the Council on Sex Offender Treatment will give the offender a green light to ask the court to grant them an order of deregistration. And if the judge agrees, then the person will be taken off the registry.
We're not arguing the merits of the case. The guy's guilty. This is merely an administrative hearing to take him off the registry.
Cameron says this frees up law enforcement resources to monitor those who truly belong on the list, especially since Texas leads the country in the number of registered sex offenders with more than 100,000 sex offenders on the registry. California and New York a long ways behind the figure in the Lone Star State.
Is that we take out people that really don't belong on the registry and leave the people that do belong on the registry, and we can allocate those resources, those government resources, appropriately to help keep the community safe.
But the county's top law enforcer didn't agree.
I would never be for a scenario where somebody would be able to deregister or get themselves off that list. I think
the sheriff skeptical of the sex offender's ability to change, and with how underreported sex crimes are.
I think at a certain point, if it was important enough for them to be put on a lifetime registration list, they should stay there forever.
So how often does this happen? The I-Team found that the Council on Sex Offender Treatment received 101 applications in 2022 and approved just 20 applicants to ask the court to get off the registry. We requested the number of people actually removed from the registry from DPS, which manages the list, and we'll share that data as soon as we hear back. For the News 4 I-Team, I'm MARIAH Medina. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. So let me go ahead and get to these comments that have come in. Bob, if you want to go to Cindy Romo, she had commented right before we started rolling the package. They should remain on the registry for a lifetime. How is that protecting future victims? So I had actually talked to a deregistration expert who has spent his entire career in rehabilitating sex offenders. And he explained to me that the registry is actually a greater stigma and a greater barrier to finding a job, finding a place to live. And that generally speaking, the reoffending rate for sex offenders is way lower than a host of different crimes. Don't quote me here, but I want to say it was less than 5% of offenders that reoffend, and he had theorized that the reason for that was because sex offenders undergo such rigorous supervision, including the sex offender registry. And so he said, what sense does it make to include this individual that has, quote unquote, served his time and is also, elderly or is not in a position to engage in touch crimes against children or against other individuals. And so he had said, I think the reason why people are reluctant to let this go is because this is a life sentence. It's so punitive. But as to how this is protecting future victims, he had suggested that keeping people on the registry is actually more harmful than it is helpful. What can we do to change this law? You said it might be safer for them to be off the list, but never actually explained that. Yeah. So the specialist that I spoke with had said, we have 101,000 about individuals on the sex offender registry. The state right below us is California with 61,000. So that's a 40,000 person difference, give or take. And so it's not a small margin. So right below California is New York with 42,000. So the gaps in the number of individuals on these sex offender registries is significant in Texas. And so this individual explained, and whenever these laws were being debated at the Texas legislature, it was explained that perhaps we can reduce the number of individuals on Texas's sex offender registry. Those low risk individuals that have been found to be low risk by scientific means and methods, and give DPS and local and state law enforcement a focus on those individuals that absolutely should be on the registry. And so that was a theory that removing these individuals that potentially may be low risk as deemed by therapists and licensed deregistration specialists would free up some room for DPS and other agencies to focus on those that are actually a threat. What is the law so we can research it? That is a good question, and I just had it up on my. It is Article 62 of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. That's where you're going to want to start. So there have been a number of different amendments as to the laws that qualify, some tweaks and changes to the laws as to the age of victims, whether it was consensual. For example, a lot of people mention Romeo and Juliet laws, and those individuals definitely sometimes do end up on the registry. One of the legislative summaries that I had read, somebody against the amendment for Romeo and Juliet laws had stated that usually courts don't prosecute individuals or don't require this of individuals who are prosecuted under that particular law. And so they said basically we should trust the judiciary to not prosecute cases where it's completely consensual. You have a man or a woman who is 18 years old and a girlfriend who is like 16 years old. 3-year difference. So this is what the law was mostly intended to address, as well as those instances in which an individual was accused of only or convicted of only one crime, period. No double counts or anything like that. One crime, one instance, that's it. And so if they went their life not doing anything else, then yeah, they would be eligible to apply. What does the sheriff think of this new law? So, Anthony, this actually isn't a new law. It's been on the books for over a decade. And earlier, I was explaining that I became aware of this just by subscribing to different newsletters. So, I subscribe to Health and Human Services newsletters. They have a ton. And one day, I'm at my desk, just checking my email, and I see Health and Human Services has updated the Sex Offender Treatment Council's step-by-step guide to early deregistration for sex offenders. And I was like, did I read that right? So I have submitted a request. I've submitted multiple requests to DPS just in the event that one gets shot down, the other doesn't, yada, yada. So one of the requests is actually for the names, addresses, and counties of residence of these individuals that were removed from the sex offender registry. The other is for more generalized data, just so the public knows, hey, in these counties, X number of sex offenders asked to be removed. X number of sex offenders asked to be removed, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it is crazy. Is that happening only in Texas, or is this a problem in the whole United States? Another great question, Lawrence. Awesome. So in my research, I've found that other states do have a deregistration process. Texas is one of a handful of states that looks into the risk of reoffending. And so the DOJ, I believe it was, did this study, researching the efficacy of focusing on the risk of reoffending. And it's crazy to me that in some states, they don't even consider that. It's just, hey, you check this box, great, you're off. And so in Texas, yes, we are one of a few states that look at the risk, of reoffending. But I don't know if it's a problem in the whole United States. Frightening story. That I think that the thing that I don't want to say concerned me, but just shocked me the most was that I had absolutely no idea. I'm somebody that has went to law school, that I think has a kind of good grasp of most of the laws in the state, and never knew that sex offenders could get off the registry. So let's see, who else?
That appears to be all the comments that we have so far.
I'm sorry, Bob, if you're talking, it's echoing, so maybe I should turn off my mic and then you can talk.
That appears to be all the comments that we have so far. That's all the comments that we've gotten so far.
Could you shoot me a message? Because I cannot hear you. Oh, those are all the comments we've gotten so far. Awesome. Okay. Well, guys, I would say if you have any other questions. Where do we go for more information? So my story is on News 4 San Antonio. I'm going to be updating it with more information as well as the form, step-by-step guide, the laws, et cetera, et cetera. But if you want more information, Health and Human Services provides an entire guidebook on how to go through this process. And let's see, Stacy Gomez, a large process to deregister. That's correct. Yes, Stacy. So I had actually asked one of a handful of deregistration specialists in the state of Texas, is this process difficult? Is it costly? And he had explained that it costs less than, he said it can cost as much as, XYZ, but it was less than $4,000. And knowing how much it costs for criminal defense representation, $4,000 is a steal. Not only that, he had explained that the process is relatively simple. It's all spelled out for you. You have step 1. Do you have any of these charges? As long as you have one, you can move on to step 2. Step 2 is the registration requirement shorter or longer than the federal requirement? And DPS actually does the homework for individuals seeking to deregister. And then you go to step 3, which is submitting your application. And if you're approved, then yes, you submit your application to the Council on Sex Offender Treatment, and you either approved or denied to speak or have a deregistration specialist review and interview with you to determine whether or not you should be recommended to petition the court for removal from the list. I believe that it's a very long process, but at the same time, I know how difficult the criminal justice system can be and how cumbersome it can be. And I was saying earlier, Texas Law Help publishes an assortment of different guides, how to go through a divorce, how to handle a child custody proceeding. But for the state itself to publish a step-by-step guide as to how to get off the sex offender registry, that just shocked me, mostly because I just know how difficult it is to get legal aid in any sort of capacity. But any final comments for me? Thank you guys so much for tuning in and for having this conversation with me. I definitely am open to any sort of pitches, any sort of comments, questions, etc. My email is mamedina@sbgtv.com, and I can have Bob, our web guru, type that, as well as our iTeam tip line. Let's see. Very good to know. I will discuss this matter with that we know, but in the same moment, I'm worried that some sex offenders could see this too. Lawrence, I thought about that as well. But if there's a step-by-step guide online published by the state of Texas, I thought to myself, those individuals that aren't equipped with this information, which is the broader, public, I want to get them that information. And so I do think that it's very important, very, very important to equip the public with this information. Sheriff Javier Salazar actually had mentioned that he didn't believe that individuals who perpetrate certain sex crimes could be reformed. I interviewed him shortly after a press conference about an awful case of all sex crimes are awful, but an awful case of child sex abuse. An individual had spent 10 years behind bars, and the moment he was released, he went back to abusing children. And so he had told me, I think that these individuals tend to go back to this particular pattern of behavior. But
hey, Mariah, thank you so much for doing this. To end, I think we should just play the package one more time.
I'm so sorry. I'm still having trouble hearing you. It's echoing on my end. If you wanted to comment or private chat it or text. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks guys so much for tuning in. I will be available at my email, and stay tuned for the next investigative episode.
I have guys that have told me, hey, doing prison was easy. Being on the registry, that's a life sentence.
Bruce Cameron is one of a handful of specialists licensed to evaluate sex offenders who want to be removed from the sex offender registry.
It's all spelled out online.
Just last month, the state's Council on Sex Offender Treatment updated its step-by-step guide on how to deregister. Sex offenders can apply if they have a single reportable conviction or adjudication, which is the legal resolution to a criminal charge, so long as the state's requirements for registration exceed those of the federal government's. DPS even publishes a list of those charges online. Charges like trafficking of children and continuous sexual abuse of a young child qualify so long as it's only one conviction or adjudication.
We've had people in Austin look at this. 25% of the people on that registry are actually theoretically eligible for deregistration.
After the Council on Sex Offender Treatment reviews the application and verifies whether the sex offender qualifies,
they receive a letter from Austin saying, hey, you qualify for a deregistration evaluation. Here's a list of the 22 deregistration evaluators in the state of Texas.
That's where Cameron comes in.
My position is to deliver the test, write up the report, and send it for somebody else to make a decision. I'm not a decision maker.
If the evaluator feels that the candidate poses a low risk of reoffending, the Council on Sex Offender Treatment will give the offender a green light to ask the court to grant them an order of deregistration. And if the judge agrees, then the person will be taken off the registry.
We're not arguing the merits of the case. The guy's guilty. This is merely an administrative hearing to take him off the registry.
Cameron says this frees up law enforcement resources to monitor those who truly belong on the list, especially since Texas leads the country in the number of registered sex offenders with more than 100,000 sex offenders on the registry. California and New York a long ways behind the figure in the Lone Star State.
Is that we take out people that really don't belong on the registry and leave the people that do belong on the registry, and we can allocate those resources, those government resources, appropriately to help keep the community safe.
But the county's top law enforcer didn't agree.
I would never be for a scenario where somebody would be able to deregister or get themselves off that list. I think
the sheriff skeptical of the sex offender's ability to change, and with how underreported sex crimes are.
I think at a certain point, if it was important enough for them to be put on a lifetime registration list, they should stay there forever.
So how often does this happen? The I-Team found that the Council on Sex Offender Treatment received 101 applications in 2022 and approved just 20 applicants to ask the court to get off the registry. We requested the number of people actually removed from the registry from DPS, which manages the list, and we'll share that data as soon as we hear back. For the News 4 I-Team, I'm Mariah Medina.